Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel, and also welcome to my night shift preparations. It is 5:30 p.m. and I have just woken up, which sounds lazy, but it's not if you consider the fact that tonight I will be covering the night shift from 11:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. tomorrow. So the morning shift in its entirety. You cannot get more morning shift than I will be doing, but I'm doing it. It's the worst shift in the world, but someone's got to do it, and as the head of the hospital, it's going to fall to me tonight. And so I wanted to, want is too big of a word. Nobody wants to eat this, but I am going to do it because it's the most nutritious meal in the world. I am going to be making one of the meals that we ate regularly while I was at war. The second time, not the first time, though we probably would have benefited from it the first time, and the camp would have came out with a lot better hair and a lot better skin, because it is really and truly that nutritious. And the fact that we didn't eat it and we didn't make it then is just shameful. But what can you do? You can't change the past, or the future, I guess, technically. But I figured, hey, while I'm making it, I may as well bring you along on the culinary delight, and maybe while I'm doing it, share a war story or three. That sounds like it could be fun, because why not? And so without further ado, let's make some vegetable pottage, and I can tell you some things that are not very stimulating to the appetite, to be honest, but again, could still be fun. You don't know, or it could be traumatizing. Either way, that depends on you. That's none of my business. First things first, you're going to require a chopping board, like this one that I prepared earlier. As well as a chopping board, you're going to require a knife, a very sharp knife, preferably. Unless you're like me, in which case this is still a sharp knife, but you need to be extra careful because I have a tendency to cut myself when I'm even just cleaning this because I have no dexterity skills. Carrot, delicious. Potato, one for every single person that you are making this recipe for. You need a potato. A parsnip and a turnip, and I'm holding both of these in the same hand at the same time because I'm going to be honest, I don't know which one is which, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by pretending that I do. But you need them. Well, you don't actually need them. What you need, in case you haven't noticed, you need root vegetables. So if you like more potatoes, have more potatoes. If you like more carrots, have more carrots. If you would prefer swede over parsnip or turnip, this big one, whichever one this is, have that instead. Just not beetroot, because beetroot is an abomination against humanity. Okay, so no beetroot. I forbid it in this recipe. I'm like especially bad at grating because I have a traumatic brain injury from getting stabbed in the eye that one time. And so I find using my hands to do things, especially when I'm holding something and using another tool at the same time, I find it next to impossible. When I'm doing something with one hand, I can do it just as well, if not better than most people, but using both hands at the same time, not so good. I think I've spoken about that before, but I think that's just, it's either the result of getting stabbed in the eye or it's the result of having a prion disease, but I suspect that it is more getting stabbed in the eye because A doesn't have dexterity issues, Ilya doesn't have dexterity issues, Dress certainly doesn't have dexterity issues. He's the one who stabbed me in the eye in the first place, but that was many, many moons ago before we were friends, and so I am very, very slow when it comes to doing things like this, and very unneat, much less neat than I wish that I was, but you win some, you lose some, I guess. Next things next, you want your potatoes to be little. You want them to be teeny tiny little slices, and it'll become apparent why, when we start cooking, why it's important for them to be teeny tiny little slices. But just for the record, why I've got you here, I did not get stabbed in the eye during war. It was not a war wound, unfortunately. I would have preferred that it would be a war wound because that way it would be less embarrassing, but it wasn't. It was the second time that I got stabbed. I have to say it like that because other people say that the first time didn't count that I got stabbed, but I like to say that it did because it hurt. But the first time was during war, and so I like to claim it during a war wound. But what happened is that I basically got impaled by a falling piece of roof tile that was about this big in my stomach, and you know, it hurt, so I like to claim it as I got stabbed. People say I didn't get stabbed, I got hit by a piece of shrapnel, not even shrapnel, by a piece of debris. I'm not even cool enough to get hit by shrapnel. And I don't know, it's not that I wish that I got stabbed more than I did in life, but You know, I would have at least liked to be able to claim that as a war wound, but all I can claim is that I broke my tooth and I got punched in the face one time, and I don't think I broke my nose. I don't think I broke my nose during that, but it hurt a lot. Punched in the face, got my foot stomped on, and then got dragged by my hair while someone else got stabbed that night. And, you know, it was a lot. So I like to claim it anyway. Every time that we went to a new camp, the cooks would cook a new batch of that in a huge pot. And we were moving camps constantly because it was a civil war and we were on the bad side of the war. And so we were having to live our lives in the woods basically because they had air artillery. And if we left the woods, they would just us all the time. So we couldn't really leave, but we were having to move camps constantly because there was also people coming in on the ground. And so whenever we moved, they would get rid of the pot of that, and then when we got somewhere, they would make a new one. And it basically became a perpetual stew in that it was available 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Not that the war went for an entire year, but you know, that's the point I'm trying to make. You would just go up and you would grab a bowl of that. You would say, I'm hungry, and they would give you a bowl of that. And sometimes there would be different toppings that you can put on top of it. So sometimes it was protein, which was usually rabbit. Today I'm really lazy, so in my fridge right now I've got a pre-shredded rotisserie chicken that I prepared earlier at the hospital because they had chicken for lunch. So I shredded up one of that. I've got, even lazier, a bag of microwave rice in my cupboard, which I could make my own rice, but I'm not going to. But yeah, sometimes they would have different proteins, usually rabbit, or they would have grains like rice or barley, or very rarely, but occasionally they would have things like cheese. They would pretty much always have some kind of bread. Not all the time, but most of the time, most often they would have bread. So if you wanted that, you could have that. But yeah, you could just go up and say, I'm hungry, and they would give you a bowl, which was completely different from the first war that I was at. That war was a total war, and you'd think, looking around the camp that we were at, that the nutrition would be better, but you'd think wrong, okay? Because this is a superfood. This is the most nutritious thing that you could put in your body. This was a staple of camp life. During the total war that I was involved in, which was the first war, it had its own, there were so many people at camp, right, that there was basically a mini self-contained economy going on. So there were 5 canteens at the first war that I was at because it was such a huge camp. I'm not entirely certain, and I can never remember exactly how many people were there, but it was well over like 500-600 people. So there were a lot of mouths to feed. And so you got your little, every morning, what were they called? What's the word in English? I don't know what the word in English, but they would send people around and they would drop off these little tokens, and you would get 3 a day, and you would take them to the canteen and you would get your meals, which is great. The food, not as good as this, not as nutritious as this, but it was okay. It was like pies and like casseroles and stews and things like that. Also very yummy, not so much nutritious. There was a lot of empty carbs and fatty proteins and things like that, but it was fine. But on top of that, because there were so many people, there was a lot of vendors within the camp. So you could then go, and if you had a little bit of extra ching ching, you could then go and buy tea cakes, or you could buy croissants, or you could buy whatever was for sale at the time. Fancy coffee, hot drinks, cold drinks, whatever you wanted that was available. If you had the money to buy it, you could buy it. I'm gonna add this in a second. This is the other thing that you add on top, so you're not just eating boiled vegetables that have been mashed down into a pottage. You add curry to it. Obviously we weren't using this curry sauce, we were using just a standard curry sauce, but I like this one better, and so I'm going to use this one better, because just because it's a war meal doesn't mean that I have to suffer wartime conditions and eat something that's less delicious. So I'm going with that one. But then during the Civil War, because it was a real civil war in that the rest of the nation that we were at, they weren't really that affected by it, as long as you weren't in the city or in one of the squads like we were. So the smaller towns weren't so affected, except for they weren't getting food as much. But to begin with, there was about 60 people that we were with, and I think by the end of the war it had doubled that size. But there was essentially 3 guys who were in charge of feeding all of us. So they made one thing. It was usually this, unless they had better ingredients, which they rarely did. This kept us alive during the very cold winter months that we all would have starved had I not turned to cannibalism, which I didn't, but I was tempted at one point to turn to cannibalism. To be fair, prior to the war, okay, prior to the war, well, not prior to the war, at the very beginning of the war before we joined. But that's a different story. That was me cutting off my best friend's finger, and I was like, I might munch on that. And then I didn't end up doing it because it was, not because it was wrong, I was not all there in the head at the time, but just because it was septic and gross and I didn't want to be eating rotten flesh. Even cockroaches know not to eat rotten flesh, right? So I didn't end up doing that. I had, during the previous war, eaten his tooth, so I think that's kind of what inspired me to do it. I wouldn't eat anyone else's body parts, but I would have eaten his, and I still would if the opportunity presented itself, which it has not since. But the point I'm trying to make is that they made one meal every single day, and you either ate it or you didn't eat it, and if you didn't eat it, too bad, you went hungry. There was nothing else available unless you went out into the woods and sourced it for yourself, which I never did because I am lazy. And there you have it. I put the chicken into it and a little bit of butter after everything, but that is right there the most nutritious meal in the entire world. It is not much to look at. It looks a bit like vomit, I'm aware of that. But it did keep us from getting scurvy and our spines folding in on themselves while we were at war. And it makes me feel better whenever I feel like I have eaten too much takeaway or junk food here in the modern West, which is very, very easy to do. So let me enjoy my nutritious meal. But like I said, the first war was kind of fine in its own way. Like, war is never fine, but as far as wars go, the first one was okay from my perspective. It was probably really bad for the people who were, actively fighting the war. But from my perspective, we were in the base camp, which was huge, and there was a lot of people around. And so you kind of fell into a routine. We only moved, we moved once, and that was it. And that was like months and months and months that I had been there. Keeping in mind, I was like the America. I was like the America of this war. I came in very, very late into the game. I was there in the last year and a bit, where this war had gone on for the better part of a decade. So I was there, I think, the last 16-ish months, and that was it. So I was like the America riding into World War War at the very last stage. And me and my best friend, because we were so young, our parents were also there as well. And when your parents are somewhere, especially in a place like a war camp, you are a bit insulated, where the second war was a lot shorter. It was a lot of a shorter war in that it went for less than a year. It went for 9 months. I don't remember exactly how long it went for, but it went for about 9 months. But it felt a lot longer than it was. And a large part of that is because we were moving around so much and we were kind of on the wrong side, not of history, as the kids like to say, we weren't on the wrong side of history, but in terms of who we were traveling with a group who kind of had a target on their back for reasons that I'm not going to get into here, but nothing to do with us. We just kind of got caught up with them. And so we were traveling around a lot. And this country was shit anyway. It was infamously shit. You know how people say, oh, they tried to invade Russia in the wintertime? This country is like Russia on crack, okay? It is terrible. It is snowing 9 months out of the year. And when it is winter, there's 4 hours of direct sunlight. It is so bad that 75% of the entire country lived in just one city. Even though it wasn't a huge country, but it wasn't a teeny tiny Portugal-sized country. It had a decent landmass, but it was just very unhospitable. And we're living in the forest, in the woods, and it's not enjoyable. We're getting hunted down almost every day, and there are people losing their feet from the cold, and food is sometimes problematic, which is why we were eating this so much, because you can find root vegetables pretty much anywhere that you go. So in general, it just felt a lot longer than the first war that I was involved in, even knowing the first war was a total war and this was just a very limited civil war. It felt a lot longer, it felt a lot harsher, it felt a lot more Game of Thrones, if you would, than the first one did. And I think as a general group, all of us have a lot more trauma from this second war than we do the first war, even though on paper the first war is so much worse than the second war was, but on a personal level it was really not, it was not great. It really, really wasn't. And to make matters worse, me and my best friend and my husband, who was also there, but we got separated for the majority of the time, we were only supposed to be there for like 2 weeks, and we ended up staying there for 9 months, which just made the trauma of it so much worse than it needed to be as well. And yeah, it wasn't a fun experience. I would not recommend it. War in general, like not the first war either, even possibly even less the first war, just because of the nature of that specific war. But yeah, the second experience was really what kind of sealed the deal and landed me where I am today, right now, talking to this camera, eating my yellow stuff. But yeah, there you go. If you want to hear the story about how the man lost his foot, I guess that's a good war story. It's pretty short. So we had been changing camp, and it was really, really cold outside, and it snowed a lot the night before. And the snow was like coming up to people's knees. They were falling in it. It was going down their shirts. And we finally get to the new camp, and we make fires, and we make everything that we need. We put up all the tents. It's looking very homely. The chefs start cooking their perpetual stew. And I'm sitting with my group in like around one fire, like a homeless group. And then the group next to us was a few men, and one of them sat down and he took off his boot, and his boot must have been tied up really poorly, because when he took off his boot, his entire foot degloved with the boot, and his skin and his fat just kind of stayed in the boot, and it was just muscle. It was like when you slow cook a hunk of beef and then you shred it with a fork. That's what it looked like. It was really gross. But there you go. That's your nightly story. I am going to go now, and so I can finish eating my food and then cleaning up my kitchen before I gotta go to work. So as always, this is Casey signing off for the night. As always, stay weird out there, stay safe, and have a productive night, my friends. I will see you tomorrow.